Good afternoon. I'm Courtney Bryan, Executive Director of the Center for Court Innovation. We're so pleased to have you with us today for the kickoff event of our year-long campaign, Transforming Justice Together, to celebrate our 25th anniversary. For those of you not as familiar with our work, the Center is on a mission to achieve justice and equity, create safe, healthy, and thriving communities, and ultimately transform the justice system. We're a unique institution in a few ways. First, we are both thinkers and doers, conducting research to help policymakers and practitioners understand problems and generate solutions, running dozens of operating programs that serve tens of thousands of people every year in courthouses and in communities like Brownsville, Red Hook, the South Bronx, keeping people out of jail, preventing gun violence, helping victims and survivors of abuse, preventing eviction, just to name a few. And finally, we share our learnings, ideas, and models with the world. We're both insiders and outsiders. We work inside the legal system and outside of it in deep partnership with communities. We work collaboratively with both government and with advocates and community members to push the justice system in new positive directions. At the Center for Court Innovation, no matter what we do or where we work, we believe in putting people first and elevating the role of the community in defining and delivering safety and justice. It's in our DNA. Particularly in Black and Brown communities that have experienced divestment, violence, over-policing and incarceration, and poverty, we continue to push for models and approaches that give local residents the ability to co-create safety and opportunity in their communities, drawing upon their strengths, their resilience, and talents. And that is what today's discussion is about. Transforming justice together is the theme of our 25th anniversary because we know that the work of creating a fair and just nation is not the work of the legal system, government, and nonprofits alone. All of us must be invested in creating this future. We will see the impact of this pandemic for years to come. We need new voices at the table, new thinking, new solutions, because transforming justice together is about creating safe, thriving, equitable neighborhoods of hope and opportunity for everyone. To help fuel what the center can do to meet the challenges of this time, we are launching the Innovation Fund. Your gift will give us the flexible funding we need to respond quickly, to try new things, to forge new partnerships, and generate bolder solutions. You can make a gift at the link in the chat. And I encourage you to support other nonprofits working to build a just and equitable world, like two of our partners in this event, Color of Change and Life Camp. Before we dive into the program, I'd like to share a short video to give you a snapshot of the center's approach and our impact over the last 25 years and what we seek for the future. The Center for Court Innovation works to achieve justice and equity and create safe, thriving communities and ultimately to transform justice systems. The center was born at a time of crisis. Violence and crime was up, and there was a sense of fear and lack of safety here in New York. And at the same time, we were incarcerating at a tremendous rate. We were at a crossroads, really. This was all kind of a backdrop for the creation of a new approach through the Midtown Community Court, which was really created to disrupt the status quo.
Having social workers in the courtroom working alongside the judge, having alternatives to incarceration, having services on site. These are all things that were unique to Midtown when it first started and now are present and active in courtrooms all around the city and really all around the nation.
The Center for Court Innovation initially started to think about how we might take lessons from the Midtown Community Court experience and bring those to scale and bring them to new parts of the justice system.
The Center for Court Innovation was incredibly helpful in encouraging innovation in Newark and being able to go out and ask the community and get honest answers. What do you think about the justice system?
Part of just like the heartbeat of the Center for Court Innovation is not to helicopter in and say, hey, we're here and this is how we do business, but to actually shut up and listen.
So many times I speak to community members about what's happening and they say almost the same thing to me. Are you for real? Are you really going to do this? Are you coming back? Because we've heard this before. We don't just go and tell people how they should do things. We really help them by giving them the resources to do it themselves.
We run groups, and when I say run groups, it's not myself or Mike or Sella running the group. It is actually the young men themselves. Everybody is sort of working towards the common goal of building a healthy relationship.
The people in neighborhoods, like, they get it. It's like for us, by us almost, versus having outside people come in and then telling us what to do and how to do it.
We have an incredibly diverse team of folks who come from all walks of life. They come from the communities we serve. They have incredibly diverse professional backgrounds, personal backgrounds, identities, approaches to this work.
We're able to think about it from a macro lens, but then we're able to dive in on the work and be in the trenches. And I think community not only appreciates that, but after a while they know that we're not going anywhere. And that's a big thing for community. Building trust is everything.
The strength with CCI programming is that it's really hyper-local. They really touch the community in an empathetic, thoughtful, innovative, strategic way. That culture or those values is what's needed to have true transformation in New York City.
How can we shrink the footprint of the system in creating and generating safety? What that may look like is community-based violence prevention programs, community-based restorative justice and healing programs, entrepreneurship and economic opportunity.
Who would have thought 10 to 15 years ago that Center for Court Innovation would be doing a gun reduction program? That's not something that we're known to do. The reentry, the violence reduction work, domestic violence, those types of things, housing, those things could be collateral damage to communities is what we're trying to change.
The Center for Court Innovation is demanding and working towards a criminal justice system that is shrinking so that people's lives can remain whole, so that people can not only have a vision for their community, but a vision for themselves and their families that they can carry out.
I don't think there's any place like the Center for Court Innovation where staff is given the opportunity to be a part of the solution and to contribute to making change in community.
I'm delighted to now introduce United States Senator Cory Booker, a national leader for criminal justice reform who's dedicated his life to fighting for those who've been left out, left behind, or left without a voice. He is both a thinker and a doer, and he knows the importance of investing in community-driven models for safety and justice. Senator Booker has long been a partner to the Center for Court Innovation. Under his leadership as the mayor of Newark, we worked together to launch Newark Community Solutions at the municipal court to keep people out of jail and connect them to the services they needed to get on their feet. I now turn to Senator Booker.
Center for Court Innovation, it's Cory Booker, and I celebrate you. CCI has been a powerful force in making community-based justice, restorative justice, the highest ideals of justice real, practically real in the lives of so many. I can speak to that. As Jethro and Kelly know, in Newark, we partnered with you when I was mayor of that city to create New Jersey's first ever community court. The principles and ideals that you are working in substantive ways in communities all across this country, I am so grateful. I know the difference you all have made and are making in the lives of so many. Look, we swear an oath to this flag that say we're going to be a nation of liberty and justice for all. That oath should be a commitment. We're not there yet. These are aspirational values. And this is an organization that for 25 years have been taking words and putting them to action, have been taking ideals and making them in the reach of more and more people. This is the work of true patriotism, which is love, not just of country, but love of your fellow countrymen and women. And what does love look like in public? As one of my favorite writers and thinkers says, what does love look like in public? It looks like justice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All the best to everyone, all the staff, all the partners, all the supporters. Thank you for what you're doing to help this organization continue for another 25 years. and more.
Thank you to Senator Booker for inspiring us today. I'd now like to introduce today's terrific moderator, Rasmia Kermani-Frey. Rasmia has a long history with the Center for Court Innovation too. Her first job was at the Times Square Business Improvement District in the early days of the Midtown Community Court. She was a force to be reckoned with as a community organizer, leading the Brownsville Partnership in Brooklyn, which was instrumental in helping us launch the Brownsville Community Justice Center. She led strategic partnerships at the New York City Housing Authority, working with us and other nonprofits to improve public housing for residents. And she is now an invaluable partner on our advisory board. Rasmia is the real deal. She knows how to translate big ideas into concrete action that puts people first. Rasmia, I turn it over to you to introduce our incredible panelists and to get this conversation started.
Great. Thank you so much, Courtney, and welcome everybody. It's so exciting to be here. I'm so thrilled to be here. It's amazing to me that the center is turning 25 this year because remarkably, so am I again. But just a quick note to put, if you have questions during the panel, to put them in the Q&A feature on your Zoom panel. And before I introduce our incredible panelists, I want to offer a little bit of framing for this panel on community-led justice. So from the media to philanthropy and lots of conversations I've heard, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard, people reference the racial reckoning and the focus on systemic inequity we are having right now as a moment. And I want to push back on that a little bit. I know for all of us on the panel and for Black and Brown communities, organizations, leaders, organizers, individuals particularly, this is not a moment just because the general public has now engaged in it. This is a movement and a life that many of us have built and lived after decades and decades of work and experience with, in, and at the hands of the criminal justice system. Parallel to this, there is also a lot of attention and talk and use of the term, again, by government, philanthropy, and others, of co-creation with community as a response to the justice system and many other systems. But what is community-led justice and co-creation? And we will explore that today. If one of the goals is to shrink the system and to engage in co-creation and community-led justice, how does confronting and dismantling white supremacy fit in? We will explore that today. And finally, while it is important to talk about ideas, we are in a time when change is happening now, been happening, needs to happen now. And quite frankly, communities have been leading change for a very long time. So we will explore how community-led justice happens. Like actually, how do we do it, support it, and co-create it? So let's get started. So first, let me introduce our incredible panel. Erica Ford from Life Camp, Alex Johnson from the California Wellness Foundation, Eric Gonzalez, the Brooklyn District Attorney, and Erica Mateo from Color of Change. So we're just going to jump in and get started. So question one, can each of you talk just a little bit about how you define community-led justice and why do you think it is getting so much attention right now? And Erica Ford, I'm going to start with you.
I think thank you for having me. Happy anniversary. Let's start there. And all the great work that you guys have been doing for all of these years. I'm glad to be a partner with you guys in the community and on the Zooms. The community justice, community-led. So I just also want to be honest that I'm multitasking. An 8-year-old was shot very close to my neighborhood. And so I'm dealing with both of them. I ran from the scene to come in here to be on time. So if you could repeat the question so that I could just be 100% clear on making sure that.
Of course. Happy to do that, Erica. So just how would you define community-led justice and why do you think it's getting all the attention that it's getting right now?
And so we have a situation right now, real time, right? A young man was shot, his son, his 8-year-old son was shot, and another person was shot. And so the society immediately looked at him from the perspective of his rap sheet and not as a human being. And so what happens with that is the basis of care in which he gets is unfortunately based on his rap sheet. And then the basis on which the community gets processed is based on the rap sheet, right? And so if it is a community-based type of situation, we are dealing with the question of generational trauma. We are dealing with the historical access to trauma from this young person who they said he had records, many incidents of his record being sealed before he was 16. So what happened in his life? And then now that generational trauma is going down to his child, because now his child has 6 gunshot wounds in his body at 8, right? And so how do we help them heal? How do we help the community understand how to resolve generational trauma? How do we pump more resources into that community that is experiencing the disease of violence so that they can heal and it doesn't get spread anymore, as opposed to looking at flooding the community with police, flooding the community with news reporters who are telling a story from the perspective of this individual has a rap sheet, this individual has a history of crime, this individual is a gang member. I see the Democrats, the Bloods and the Crips in the White House fighting every day. Ain't nobody dealing with them from the perspective of these guys are fighting each other and this one, this, and they're not doing that, right? But those are grown men and women, red and blue, fighting and using their tools that they have to fight against each other, to the detriment of stealing elections and storming the White House, et cetera, et cetera. People were killed, right? Then we have, or even on a local level, right? We often see our high-level elected officials barking at each other, right? And they're using it. And so if we look from the perspective of these might be people in different organizations that are having conflict, how do we teach them to resolve the conflict different? How do we look at what they've been exposed to their entire life that led them to the gun as a tool to resolve their pain or their interpersonal conflict? And so that's the difference of community. And that's why it's important. And they're talking about it because during the pandemic, everybody got a gun and they put it in our community.
Erica, thank you so much. And we are, I think, all with you now as you are dealing with this in real time. So I hope you feel that sincerely. So Erica, Mateo, I'm going to turn to you next, and I will repeat the question. So just how would you define community-led justice, and why do you think it's getting the attention that it's getting right now?
I also want to start by saying happy anniversary to the Center for Court Innovations, my former work home. And I also just want to just uplift the things that Erica spoke about in terms of creating spaces of transformative justice and healing, and having a neighbor-to-neighbor community-driven approach to that healing and to those responses. I also just want to examine the question a little bit. Oftentimes, we act as if we don't know what safe communities look like, and we do, right? They look like Park Slopes, they look like the Upper West Side. And oftentimes what we see is that the question of community-driven safety can be taken as, how do those people get their act together? And what I do want to focus on is and while taking care of neighbors is very important, and we should invest in community networks to create more vibrant and safe neighborhoods, there's real structural issues. And that is where we really need to put all of our organizing and advocacy efforts. So that means, right, we need, I will say, there's the basics of schools, parks, streets, and sanitation, but there also is real investment in community groups like Life Camp and others that need to be made so that way they become structures just as prominent as those like the police department, et cetera. And so I'll wrap on that one.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you for bringing the systems lens into this, which we will talk about in further questions, but thank you for bringing it in here. Okay, next to comment, Alec, can we get your comments on how you would define community-led justice and why do you think it's getting the attention that it is right now?
Thank you, Raz. And just let me just start by echoing the thanks and gratitude for the Center for Court Innovation, just for the work and the labor over 25 years. And I'm appreciative of this opportunity to join really what is a critical conversation. And I'd be remiss if I just did not acknowledge that this is real work, and it's exemplified by what Miss Erica Ford, lifted up in real time that she is dealing with and helping to work out. And so I'm grateful for her and all those who do this work. So I'll say this, for generations, we've just really been fed this myth that, more cops, more prisons, more sentencing enhancements, more locking up of children, more harsh punishment is the answer, that it's the way out, that it's the way that we ought to engage to keep communities safe. And I think what we're seeing now is really this recognition, this acknowledgement of what Black communities in particular have experienced for generations upon generations, the dehumanization and the trauma of a system that is sick, that has perverted the notion of safety and of justice. At the end of the day, communities, know what they need. They know what they need to be safe, to be free from harm. They know what they need to thrive. And so I think when I think about community-led justice, I'm thinking about a few things. I think about communities summoning their power. I think about communities giving voice and giving voice generally to those who have often been unheard, have been unseen, the survivors, the peacemakers and interventionists, the young people, those who have been formerly incarcerated. I think of community-led justice as about liberation and self-determination, about dignity and respect. And ultimately, when I observe and I listen to those who are working on the front lines, who are working on the ground, who are preventing conflicts, who are organizing, who are engaging in policy and advocacy day in and day out, I think about this deep and abiding and unyielding love, the love of community, the love for your brother, the love for your sister. And I think Senator Booker appropriately quoted Dr. Cornel West, that justice is indeed what love looks like in public. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, so much, and bringing in another really important concept, feeling, because this is so much about feelings too, which we need to talk about. And love is such an important feeling. Anger is such an important feeling, and they're cousins of each other. And it's so important to talk about feeling and power. And last but certainly not least, DA Gonzalez, if you could offer comments on how you would define community-led justice, and why do you think that it's getting the attention it's getting right now?
Well, let me say to the Center for Court Innovation, congratulations on your anniversary. For me, I've been on the path with CCI as we evaluate how we approach the issues of safety and fairness. Much of the work of CCI has transformed over the last 25 years, when much of it was based in smart courts and interventions in the courtroom. And like CCI's evolution, the evolution for a district attorney's office is looking at the goals and values of our community and listening to what people want and listening to how they say safety feels like and what justice needs to be like in the community. It's going to look different from place to place, but it's definitely centered in the voice of people who've been involved in the justice system, who understand how the system fails the community and when the system is successful. And for myself, leading a very large district attorney's office in Brooklyn, it's making sure that the work that we do here in this county is actually listening to people. So for example, I have a gun diversion program that has been criticized because, in New York, we have mandatory minimums on gun cases. And I've listened to my community members tell me, yes, we want people to be held responsible and accountable for gun violence, but there's a distinction between gun violence and someone who happens to have a gun, and sending young people to prison or to jail in every case without any possibility of redemption is not what communities feel is going to keep them safer or even promote justice. And a lot of the work that we're doing in this county now is actually saying we don't have all the answers in the courthouse. Much of the answers and the solutions should be publicly led by involving and listening to our community members. So we have different programs that we're working through here, but it's really, as district attorney, allowing the power that has been vested in this office and through me as the elected DA, and saying, I'm going to share that power with the community. So we have a project restoration that came out of Brownsville, and really it was some gang members who came together and said, we're tired of all the violence. We want a restorative program here to deal with issues in our community, and we need funding. And so can we help, DA, can you help us find funding for that program? And our new Demeanor project, which is saying some cases never have to come to the justice system. In some cases never have to come to court. We can hold folks accountable without sending them to court at all. And so that's what public-led safety feels like to me. It's listening to my partners in the community and saying, we're going to trust you to figure out solutions, and we are going to support you. We're going to use the institution that traditionally had prosecuted cases and was really the hammer in the system as really a support.
Thank you so much. And I want to move on to the second question. And a lot of what you all have said and what we've heard is institutions, as DA Gonzalez just mentioned, reforming of institutions, systems, communities know what they want, listen, power, anger, they all are knitted together. And so I want to take one aspect in the second question based on everything that you've said. So the second question is, now that we have an understanding of how at least each of you define community-led justice, let's get into something pretty heavy, which is, how can community-led justice fight white supremacy and transform the current inequities in the justice system? I think we can't have a conversation about any system without talking about white supremacy. And so we will start again. And now this time I'm going to start, Alex, with you. Again, the question is, how can community-led justice fight white supremacy and transform the current inequities in the justice system? Small question.
Small questions. White supremacy is ultimately about power. It's about the maintenance of power, frankly, at all costs. And we know and we've seen how that expresses itself in many ways. We've seen what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. We've seen the subjugation of communities. We've seen the disinvestment in communities. We've seen the suppression of communities at the expense of safety. I think ultimately oppression is operationalized. And so what we are witnessing across this nation, where I am at home in Los Angeles, we're witnessing not just a transformation of these inequitable systems, but really, as it's been said, organized movements to dismantle these systems of oppression and dislodge those who have stood and who keep standing as pillars, holding up the status quo. And I just have to give more love to the work of Ms. Erica Ford and Pastor McBride and Shawnee Buggs and Fatima Dreyer and Amber Goodman and others who have held power to account with a work around funding peace and redirecting dollars that may otherwise have gone to law enforcement back into communities, lifting up organizations like Black Organizing Project in Oakland and the Dignity in Schools Coalition, who are ensuring that school police are not the norm in schools. And then just thinking about the work that is done each and every day by those who are often unnamed, who are simply letting their good work be seen and are pushing the levers of power to ensure that those institutions that have attempted to ensure that white supremacy persists are no more. And I just think it's about the work, the organizing, holding power to account, making sure that communities are vested with the power and the voice to move what has often seemed immovable. And that work continues. It obviously is not done, but we've seen systems fold. We've seen things change because of just the tremendous work that community organizations and the ground is doing to hold power to account. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Alex, very much. And DA Gonzalez, I'm going to turn to you now. Same question, obviously. How can community-led justice fight white supremacy and transform the current inequities in the justice system from your perspective?
I think a lot of it is about changing what default responses have always been to challenges in our community. And so obviously making sure that we are resourcing our communities and building giving the community the ability to stand on its own 2 feet and create safety and create the ability to raise families in healthy, vibrant conditions is key and essential. In my role as prosecutor, however, it's also me, publicly insisting that not every incident should even lead to an arrest. Not every arrest should lead to a prosecution, and not every prosecution needs to lead to a conviction. And very few of these cases should lead to the loss of liberty, incarceration. That we turning, on its side the concept of what, and how safety is being produced. And I think that, moving forward, I'm saying that the savings by changing the defaults to our normal response to crime gets invested back in our community is going to be a key way that we fight white supremacy. The concept of that, there has to be winners and losers, and there's a natural order of who becomes losers under the status quo. And being district attorney at this moment in time, where there is, rising violence, really further, cements my commitment, because we've seen in this city and we've seen across this country that violence is rising even as we're pouring more and more money into law enforcement.
Thank you, DA Gonzalez. And I'm going to not offer my commentary now in between because I want to move the time along. And so, Erica, Mateo, over to you.
Yeah, I will say just my first reaction to the question was that, to continue to ask people of color to use all of their energy to fight against white supremacy is a lot to ask for. And the pushback is by uplifting, Black joy, by investing in healing, by investing in those communities to thrive as they direct themselves to. But I also am saying that as someone who is an organizer and advocate, right? That's what I do. And so in that recognition that, I say that in that recognition that I know as an organizer that it has been really, really tough, to often sometimes take care of myself as we do this work and those around me. But when we do fight, we do see change. And speaking from not just the local lens of New York City, but around the country, I would say one of the biggest examples of that when we fight back is our election, what we saw happen during the election and how Black cities across the United States and Philadelphia and Atlanta, pushed back and we won. So I just want to stop there. I think that, of course, when we're thinking about community driven justice, we are asking in tandem, how are we pushing back on systems? And what that means is, for system players to give up power, submit to oversight, lean into community partnerships, welcome community and public accountability, and increase the accountability for system players. We're talking about, especially within our criminal justice system, more thorough reviews of use of force, removing qualified immunity, thinking about how we stand up community elected precinct captains, et cetera. Those are all things that are being advocated for across our country and in New York City. I also just want to uplift, continuing to decriminalize as we're doing with marijuana, sex work, and debt. And to DA Gonzalez's point, reviewing mandatory minimums and how and when we choose to incarcerate. Again, I want to just end my point, thinking about how we continue to uplift, transformative justice tactics that are centered in joy and not just about fight. I think all too often we think we uplift the resiliencies of community, which exists, and it deserves that limelight. But we shouldn't only define ourselves by our struggle, but by our strength.
Thank you, Erica. Mateo, and now Erica Ford, certainly last but certainly not least. Please, the same question, and let me repeat the question. How can community-led justice fight white supremacy and transform the current inequities in the justice system?
Yes, I agree with what everyone said before. I echo that, and I think that, as Erica was saying, that it's a mindset, right? It's a cultural norm that is supported by a system, right? Back to the beginning of time. And so when we look at who runs the system, right? The operators of the system, we can organize to get new operators that maybe have different mindsets and different relationships to the people in general and come from a place of love and compassion as opposed to hate and racist ideologies. And really, that's the only, because it's a system, right? And so we can do things consistently with the ice pick or the hammer and beat it away, but it's a system, and we have to uproot the system. We have to put different people in place. So, for example, when Eric Gonzalez came into office in Brooklyn, and when Ken came into office in Brooklyn, he changed the system, and he changed the way they related to crime and they related to justice. And so people weren't able to, from a space of hate, prosecute, because there's a lot of DAs in office who come from racist ideologies. There's a lot of police in places that come from racist. So when they show up with their racist behavior, and they relate to me and anyone else from a space of racism and injustice and hate and contempt, right? And so I can stand here on my side and I can, educate, and I can, stand firm and have my people together, and we can organize and we can resist and we can, but when they go to, when the conversation goes to an Eric Gonzalez or an elected official or someone who upholds this system, they have to prosecute them for misbehavior. They have to hold them accountable. They have to identify the behavior as racist and punish them for what they did. Because if people don't get punished, and if we're not holding people accountable, then the behavioral norms are not changing. They're getting recertified. And so, there's a lot of things that we can do. We resisted for years. People in the streets last summer and for years, have been resisting the racist behavior of many, both in uniforms and out of uniforms. And so it has brought to light the ability to get an Eric Gonzalez or Kent Thompson in office and then an Eric Gonzalez in office, right? And so those are the things that we have to do. We have to get people who are in these systems out. We have to continue to educate and mobilize people. And then we have to show the example of what we're talking about, right? We have to show the example. And so we built a system, the crisis management system in New York, that we looked at how we dealt with violence. And if we weren't successful, we wouldn't be able to have a successful conversation around the nation because there's nothing to show, or in Oakland, in Richmond. So we create the example of how you can have community policing, how we can take care of ourselves, how we can, allow you not to come in and hold you accountable. Right now, they want to search somebody's house. We're like, we're holding them to, like, no, we're going through a negotiation. We're going in with you, not going to do that, and so they can't just run up in there, right? And so there's different things that we can try to negotiate because we're not in the level of total power, and they don't look at us really as co-producers because we would be, and so we have to continue to negotiate space and push back wherever we get resistance.
Thank you, Erica, so much. And I know as moderator, right now we're supposed to move into Q&A, but I have one more question, and we're gonna do it, and we're still gonna get to Q&A. And so, because Erica Ford, what you started doing was naming actual programs, actual changes, actual things, right? And so I want to talk just for a minute about this idea of co-creation. So, like, how many of those were co-created, and what does that mean? And so for each of you, and this is lightning round, so again, don't get mad when I cut you off, please. But what does it mean to co-create those things? Co-create, like, specific, how do you do it? And how do you co-create so that communities and people are actually leading and are actually participating in their own self-determination? And I think that's an important question to ask just before we get to Q&A. So what do I take off the clock? I'm taking 30 seconds off the clock from everyone. So 1 minute and 30 seconds. But Erica, Mateo, like, what does it mean to co-create so that communities and people have self-determination?
I'll try to do it in less, because I think my answers are pretty simple, but it's a tough thing to execute on. And I'm sure, and Erica Ford could attest to this, and I'm sure Alex can too, of just co-creation means actually being in community. And while that sounds like, oh, very simple, like you just need to show up, you need to show up when, where the people are that you most need to have that conversation with. You need to listen intently and thoroughly. you need to hand over power. You need to hand over resources. Identify key decision-making points and create space for those members of the community to actually make those decisions. What I'm a big fan of iteration, and for me, what that has meant is you take your best educated guess and you put it into motion, and you see what it does, and you continue to do that over and over again until you mold something in its best light and form, and that's what I think is key to. And there's programs that do that. I'll be remiss to not uplift programs where I worked at the Brownsville Community Justice Center and neighborhood safety initiatives at the Center for Court Innovations.
Thanks, Erica. Alex, to you, same question.
So everything that Erica said holds true. I think listening is such a important skill that is often unheeded, and to co-create is definitely about listening. It's about really interrogating the hard questions. It's about stepping back. I work in philanthropy, and philanthropy's role in co-creation should be funding the work, funding the organizations at the level they need to be funded at, and then stepping back and letting the organizations, letting the people, letting the activists, the organizers do the work. And I think about one example in particular that I'm excited about and continue to be excited about as it really pushes change. It has been the LA County Youth Work Group, which was tasked with really reimagining a punitive and outdated and oppressive youth justice system in LA County, the largest juvenile justice system in the nation, a probation department that has been focused on punishment rather than care and healing. And so this work group was put together that included youth at the center, that included community-based youth-serving organizations at the center, those who have been most harmed and least helped at the center of the work, alongside an equal, as was mentioned, partnership with decision makers from county government. We sat side by side as equals, debating, discussing, talking about what the future of this justice system ought to look like. And led by a planning team who had lived experience, who were on the front lines in organizing and advocacy across the county. And now, because of that work, because of young people who led, who drove that change, LA County is on the verge of dismantling this system that has been harmful, that has caused so much pain in families and communities. That's what co-creation is: stepping back, letting those who are most impacted lead the way, listening to them, and change will happen.
Thanks, Alex. Erica, back to you. Erica Ford, back to you. And then DA Gonzalez, when Erica Ford is done speaking, just jump on in.
My head is in so many places.
You also don't need to speak if you don't want to. Just know that we're a loving, caring space. Caring for each other is paramount, and I'm for real. I'm serious. If it's too much, if you don't want to, don't.
Erica, why don't I jump in and give you a moment? For myself, this Tuesday, we just had a meeting in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, and we invited the community out to the meeting. And really, the purpose of the meeting was to listen. I had announced that a number of men had been arrested and indicted, and we charged 10 people. There was 18 people in total. We charged 10 of them with murder. for a number of fatal shootings, and there were another 8 non-fatal shootings. And so a number of people were being taken from our community and being arrested and indicted. And so as district attorney, I wanted to actually explain why I took the actions I took, that these arrests didn't come lightly, and what they were about. It wasn't about talking about the strength and weaknesses of the case, but listening to the community about how that impacted that community, and also just to kind of listen to the points that both Alex and Erica made to how the community wants me to handle similar cases like this, where you have, egregious violence in the community, and what's the appropriate response. It also means, and some of the other work and doing what Erica said is, creating programs and seeing how it works out. And so in one of the programs that we've started in Brooklyn called the New Demeanor Justice Project, there are arrests that are being made by the police department. We're getting these individuals are getting desk appearance tickets. And in the past, my office would write up these cases and just send them to court. Today, we're making referrals to community-based organizations. We have very little input on the outcome of those cases other than to know that there's been something done, and the community-based organizations will decide after conversations and having discussions among themselves and with the person who's been caught up in the criminal justice system about what's appropriate as an outcome in that case. And the goal is not just services, right? A lot of it looks like services, but for me, I think the most important goal is I'm trying to create positive social networks in our community. And thinking that if we create those positive social networks, my job as district attorney has been largely done. There's been accountability, and then we're moving forward and trying to do the prevention work. And so again, it means me taking a step back and letting the community lead on these important issues of a lot of the local quality of life issues and local issues as it relates to how people feel safe in their own neighborhoods. And so that's what we're doing, but it is putting the work in, making sure that we're doing the work, and then taking a step back.
Thank you, DA Gonzalez, so much. And we do have a few minutes for a question from our audience. And I think, DA Gonzalez, you are kind of leading to the question that I'm going to ask, and all of you had, which is, as you think about the work ahead, your work ahead, ideally for you, and I'm not going to call on you in order, so anybody who has a thought or feels moved to speak, please do. Ideally for you, what is the next phase of this community-centered movement? Well, or said in another way, is there something missing now that you hope to see next? Or is there something that you are seeing that is creating connection, joy, love, effectiveness that is not being lifted that you would want to lift as the work moves forward?
I think it's important that we, in this space right now where there has been an increase in gun violence, and Erica Ford, just know that all of us, our hearts are with you and the community and what you're dealing with right now over there in your part of Queens, because it's heartbreaking to see any loss of life, but when we're talking about an innocent 8-year-old child, it really is difficult. And so at this moment, I think we are in a crossroads because we want to make sure that we don't backtrack and we don't go back in the wrong way. And so, as district attorney, I think that it's important for me to sort of have conversations with the community about what the metrics of safety look like how do we communicate that we're being effective in community-led public safety and moving what those metrics may look like. And then just sort of also making sure that our partners actually have both the formal capacity to do the work, meaning they have the resources that they need to be successful, and then some of the informal capacity as well, and how do we support that happening. We know that there's the talent.
Because she said it's 1 minute left. So I'm gonna just jump in when
Yep,
you say.
we got 2 minutes. Yep, please.
The American Rescue Funds that was given to different states, that we need governors and mayors to use some of those funds for community-based public safety. We need the Congress and Senate to pass the jobs bill and the infrastructure bill so that the $5 billion that Alex talked about that's in that bill can come to the people on the ground across the nation and help build that work, because the level of playing fields are not leveled. And so we need a much larger amount of resources to go to the ground to help people heal, to help people recover, to help build the infrastructure of these organizations so that they can do the work that they do, and the organizations to be treated as partners, That co-produce means we gotta co-produce. That means we gotta really look at each other as partners. And so that's what I wanna say. It's not politics, it's people's lives, and we gotta put the human side of people's lives.
Thank you, Erica. We have 1 minute. Either Alex or Erica Mateo wanna?
30 seconds, for less than 30 seconds. I'll just say, we cannot forget about the hard work of implementation. A lot of efforts to pass laws, and then oftentimes we turn our back on the implementation. And by we, I mean government often turns its back on the important work of implementation. So when we're thinking about co-creation, we also ought to be thinking about implementation to make sure that the work that's been done is institutionalized and is held accountable, and that the public has a role in that.
Congratulations to CCI, really, for changing the work in the courthouse, outside the courthouse, and really the helping change the conversations about justice and fairness.
And thank you, DA Gonzalez. And I think the same can be said for all of you here. I want to thank all of you, DA Gonzalez, Erica Ford, Erica Mateo, Alex, for really bringing your whole selves here authentically. It is not easy to do, to be so present and so yourself. And Erica Ford, especially dealing with what you're dealing with in this moment. Again, like I hope you feel our support. It's certainly being sent. To the Center for Court Innovation, congratulations on 25 years. It's a real honor to be here and celebrate you. Along with these just unbelievable leaders and movement makers and change makers on this panel. So Courtney, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. And I know we are at 5 o'clock. And I just wanted to read out a few words to end us on, in an affirmative vision for what we are seeking. These were words that spoke to me: liberation, self-determination, dignity, power sharing, healing, welcoming of accountability, and centering joy and love. So that's what I'd like to end on. And thank everybody again for coming out to listen and learn, and hope that you will continue to learn with us over the next year as we put on new events and more events and celebrate our partners who are in this work with us. So take care. Thank you again.